Everyone, and happy Friday to you. Things getting a little bit cooler in the east, but warmer in the west. High temperatures for later on today. 40s for northern New England, northern New York. 50s across the rest of the northeast. 60s all the way from southern New Jersey back just to the Mississippi coastline. 70s and 80s in Florida only today. Some 30s moving into North Dakota, northern Minnesota, and the upper peninsula of Michigan. But 50s and 60s across the rest of the plain states, central and southern plains. 30s and 40s also across the northwest. 50s, 60s, and just a few 70s for Southern California and Arizona. There's a complete weather update ahead on Daybreak, but right now here's the Friday forecast for some selected cities around the country.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, barred from the White House, fired from his job, and under investigation, says he'll tell everything he knows when the time and place are right. There are reports North briefed others in the White House about secret cash transfers to the Nicaraguan rebels. A Justice Department probe of the affair sets its sights on the CIA.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With John Holliman in Washington and Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta.
Good morning. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North has reportedly been the subject of a months-long FBI investigation. United Press International says some White House officials raised questions about North's activities, but were told the FBI had found nothing illegal. North was fired on Tuesday as the administration revealed he was at the center of a secret operation which diverted cash from Iranian arms sales to Nicaraguan rebels. Justice Department and congressional investigations of the transfers have reportedly turned to the CIA and its director, William Casey. The Washington Post reports today the probe centers on the agency's possible role in setting up a Swiss bank account for the Contra rebels. Meanwhile, White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan is denying he had prior knowledge of the Contra connection. CNN's Frank Sesno reports from Santa Barbara, California.
UPI quotes an unidentified White House official who says Chief of Staff Donald Regan did know about the diversion of up to $30 million to the Nicaraguan Contras. Regan denies it.
No, that's ridiculous. I was not briefed thoroughly on all of this. I mean, I don't know where the story came from. How can you comment on an unnamed source? Do you all enjoy your Thanksgiving?
How about you?
Sounds to me like I'm the turkey.
The situation has been further complicated by reports that Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, fired from the National Security Council, destroyed vital documents before his departure. Officials will neither confirm or deny the story. The elusive North was seen at his home and wasn't talking either.
I can't make a statement now. When the time is appropriate, I will give all the facts in the appropriate forum, and I will do so under the advice of my counsel.
Nonetheless, North went to the White House Thanksgiving morning, tried to get in, but according to a spokesman for the Secret Service, was turned away because he didn't have a valid pass. One official says North has now been placed on the Do Not Admit list. Presidential aides say if North destroyed anything official, it's not lost.
I do know that national security documents are not in the possession of just one person. There are copies of them, and there is a central file, and that's not under, that's under close supervision, so there'll be no chance that those will be missing.
One source who knows North describes him as very secretive, not the kind of man to keep extensive or incriminating personal notes in his office. But, says the source, we probably will never know precisely what Ollie did. As the president spends Thanksgiving weekend at his ranch with his family, his top aides continue to distance themselves from the controversy while pledging cooperation with the Justice Department's widening criminal probe.
Obviously, I'm back out here, but the Attorney General has brought in senior Department of Justice officials, the FBI, and this is a normal procedure. We want to have out in the open anything of a wrongdoing.
But there is a lot that is not out in the open, with new questions about documents possibly destroyed, and who knew what and when. A spokesman for the Justice Department says there's no reason to believe there were more people involved than Attorney General Meese originally reported. But officials note the Iranian arms scandal is now in the hands of the investigators, and no one is predicting where that investigation will go. Frank Sesno, CNN, with the president in Santa Barbara.
The administration is considering a Middle East trip by Secretary of State Schultz to let officials in Egypt and Jordan know more about the Iran arms deal. One administration official says Schultz would go to allay the concern felt by Egypt and Jordan about Israel's role in the arms sale. That same official says Vice President Bush is not going overseas because of his possible involvement with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. This official says, quote, "We're not sure he's going to come out clean." And as if this story weren't bizarre enough already, a lawyer for the American flyer Eugene Hassenfuss, in jail in Nicaragua, where his plane was shot down with Contra arms aboard, says the Iran arms deal could get Hassenfuss back to the U.S. The lawyer, Ernest Pledger, says the probe of the arms sale provides a chance for Hassenfuss to come home to testify in the U.S. The Iran deal, of course, involved funneling money to the Contras in Nicaragua.
Going on 5.5 minutes past the hour now. In Brazil, as many as 76 people are reported hurt after a violent demonstration in Brasilia against government-ordered price increases. Police used clubs and dogs to battle thousands of protesters as they marched to the streets of the capital yesterday. At least 3 buses and 14 police cars were burned by demonstrators. Price hikes of as much as 100% on some products have been imposed. The move is meant to slow a consumer spending boom that has upset the trade balance, weakening Brazil's already ailing economy.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev is calling President Reagan's plan to break the SALT II arms treaty a major mistake. Gorbachev ended a 4-day visit to India today with a news conference in New Delhi. He spoke of the U.S. decision to arm another B-52 bomber with nuclear missiles in violation of the limits on the unratified SALT II treaty. Gorbachev says the move shows contempt for international treaties and will slow superpower arms control efforts.
Lava from Hawaii's Kilauea volcano could reach the sea today for the first time in 13 years. Firefighters are using hoses to try to cool the molten rock and turn it away from residential areas. The attempt has only been partially successful. 9 buildings and homes have been destroyed by lava in the past 3 days. A major highway was cut off yesterday. About 60 residents in the area have been evacuated.
In McDonald, Ohio, fire damage to 32 homes and businesses may add up to $1 million. Natural gas went surging through pipelines yesterday afternoon. The increased gas pressure apparently caused pilot lights to flare in water heaters, furnaces, and stoves, and that sparked fires in a 30-block area. The East Ohio Gas Company says the gas surge happened when water flooded an underground pressure regulator. In the meantime, officials are investigating the cause of a fire in Southern California that destroyed a senior citizens complex that was under construction. The fire in Huntington Beach is estimated to have caused $1 million in damage. Residents of a nearby retirement home were evacuated briefly, but there are no reports of injuries. It is now 7.5 minutes past the hour on this Friday morning. Time for a check of the weather. Here's Valerie Voss. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning, Brian, and thank you. We're watching some more wet weather across the Gulf Coast today. A low pressure center over the Gulf producing rains in coastal regions from Texas across the Gulf and moving into the Carolinas by later on this evening. That weather could be some heavy rains for coastal regions, and already saturated ground could cause some flood problems. We're going to keep an eye on that throughout the day. So far, nothing has been... A complete weather update is just ahead on Daybreak.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
President Reagan's chief of staff denies he knew of and sanctioned secret cash transfers to Nicaragua's Contra rebels. Donald Reagan says reports he was briefed by fired aide Oliver North are ridiculous. North is barred from the White House and is being investigated amid reports he destroyed key documents.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With John Holliman in Washington and Donna, Kelley, and Bob Cain in Atlanta.
Starting Monday, the government will begin drug testing federal employees, according to the Washington Post. And this story says that bosses would be allowed to fire employees for a first offense. CNN's Sasha Fu reports that's not what President Reagan said he wanted the program to do when he signed an executive order setting up drug testing.
It was September when the president signed his executive order calling for a drug-free workplace.
This is the federal government's way of just saying no to drugs.
But according to the Post, the new guidelines will go further than what the president originally planned.
I think we're pretty much agreed. that we should make it plain that we're not out to get people and fire them.
The Post obtained a copy of the guidelines and says they will allow an agency head to fire federal workers after a first offense and say an employee must be dismissed after a second. This heightens concern over who could be tested.
It's particularly vital that those in sensitive occupations have clear minds.
Just who is in a sensitive job? According to the Post, that could be more than half of all government workers, and they could be tested at the discretion of their bosses. The regulations provide that workers be notified 60 days in advance of the drug testing program. 30 days notice will be given before a second test. Employees failing urinalysis, refusing to take the test, or failing to complete drug counseling would be subject to disciplinary action, including leave, suspension, or dismissal. The paper reports no proof would be required that drugs affect employees' work. The rules provide for counseling and assistance to help federal workers overcome drug problems. However, the authorization to fire employees on the first offense is expected to be met with strong opposition from federal workers and unions. Sasha Fu, CNN reporting.
The fired White House aide, revealed this week to have been at the center of a secret program to fund the Contras, has reportedly been under investigation for months. UPI says Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was investigated by the FBI. White House staffers who questioned North's activities were reportedly told the FBI had found no wrongdoing. North reportedly shredded papers that might have shown who else knew about the Contra cash transfers. Yesterday, North didn't say much.
I can't make a statement now. When the time is appropriate, I will give all the facts in the appropriate forum, and I will do so under the advice of my counsel.
UPI reports North briefed White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan about the Contra funding program. An official quoted by UPI says Regan approved of using money from Iranian arms sales to finance the Nicaraguan rebels and was kept informed. Regan denies it.
No, that's ridiculous. I was not briefed thoroughly on all of this. I mean, I don't know where the story came from. How can you comment on an unnamed source? Do you all enjoy your Thanksgiving?
How about you?
Sounds to me like I'm the turkey.
The Washington Post says the Justice Department and Congress are investigating the CIA's role in the Contra connection. Today's Post reports the investigators want to know about the CIA's role in setting up a Swiss bank account used to funnel money to the Contras. CIA Director William Casey has acknowledged CIA involvement in collecting Iranian payments for arms, but Casey reportedly maintains he did not know the money was going to the Contras until this week. Investigator Edmund Muskie, a former senator, one of 3 commissioners appointed by the president to probe the National Security Council, says the White House is pressing his panel to move quickly. Muskie says the White House wants a report in 30 to 45 days, but he says a thorough review will surely take much longer.
Marinette, State of Wisconsin, United States of America.
The lawyer for Eugene Hassenfuss says the Iran arms sale investigation may help his client. Attorney Ernest Pledger says Hassenfuss may be called to testify in the U.S. because the Iran deal involved money from Iran going to the Contras. Hassenfuss was captured 2 months ago after parachuting from a plane loaded with arms for the Contras.
A former nuclear technician was charged with treason and espionage today in Israel. Mordecai Vanunu allegedly told a British newspaper he used to work in an Israeli nuclear bomb factory. The newspaper published photographs of the alleged factory, reportedly located under the Negev desert. Israeli prosecutors consider the case one of the most severe breaches of security in Israeli history. Vanunu could face the death penalty if convicted. Vanunu is expected to be in court on Sunday. It will be the first time he has been seen in public since mysteriously disappearing from London.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev claims President Reagan is violating the spirit of their October arms talks in Reykjavik. Gorbachev was referring to the U.S. intention to violate the limits of the SALT II treaty by putting a new missile-carrying bomber into service today. In a news conference before leaving India, Gorbachev accused the U.S. of showing contempt for arms control. He also said the U.S. had not officially notified the Soviet Union of its plan to violate the limits set by the still unratified arms treaty. Just yesterday, Gorbachev signed a proclamation calling for the dismantling of all nuclear weapons.
Government price hikes in Brazil sparked violent demonstration in the capital city. At least 76 people were injured and more than 100 arrested during a day and night of rioting, burning, and looting. CNN's Mark Leff has the story.
Trouble flared during an anti-government rally which police in the Brazilian capital had tried to ban. Brazil's year-old civilian government has imposed a series of austerity measures to bring down inflation, which had been as high as 200% a year. Its early moves were popular. President José Sarney's party scored a major victory in national legislative elections earlier this month. But last week, the government ordered hefty increases in the price of automobile fuel, cigarettes, alcohol, and other items, doubling them in some cases. That was too much for workers who won't get wage increases to match. Police used tear gas and nightsticks on some of the thousands of demonstrators who gathered near the presidential palace. Others retaliated by torching police and army vehicles in a nearby parking lot. Brazil owes more than $100 billion to foreign banks, and even leaders of President Sarney's own party are telling him the government can't afford to pay all the interest on the loans and assure economic growth at home. The country's finance minister, who recommended the recent price hikes, tried to quit earlier this week, but the president said no. The rally reportedly left more than 70 people injured and about 20 cars and trucks in charred ruins. A government spokesman said the president has no immediate plans to change either his economic advisors or their policies. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
8 minutes past the hour. This is Daybreak for Friday morning, the day after, and here's a preview of your weather for this big shopping day. Valerie?
Well, it's going to be wet across a couple of parts of the country, but nothing new for some of you. Unfortunately, we have more rain, showers, and thunderstorms in store for the Gulf Coast states. Grounds in parts of Louisiana already saturated after 12 inches of rain. From now, a complete weather update is just ahead on Daybreak.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Pope John Paul tells Australian schoolchildren he likes rock and roll music. His favorite color is green, and he describes what it was like to get shot. The 10-year-olds peppered the pontiff with questions. One verdict from the Melbourne classroom, he's a good bloke. In Washington, word that federal employees who flunked their first drug test could get fired.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With John Holliman in Washington and Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta.
Good morning. New drug use guidelines for federal workers reportedly stray from President Reagan's assurances of compassion for first-time offenders. The president said back in August that workers who flunked their first drug tests should be rehabilitated, not canned. But today's Washington Post says the Office of Personnel Management is about to publish new rules which let bosses fire drug users for a first offense. The Post reports the new rules say workers in sensitive positions have to be fired for a second offense. Just over half the government's 2.1 million employees are said to fall into this sensitive category. The State Department will begin screening American diplomats and their families for the AIDS virus. Secretary of State Schultz approved the plan last September. Employees who test positive for AIDS will be severely limited from service overseas. State Department medical officers say the AIDS test was made mandatory because many overseas posts lack the right medical facilities to treat the syndrome and because the department draws blood bank supplies from its own employees. The Justice Department's investigation of a secret Contra funding operation run from the White House was reportedly widened to include the CIA. The Washington Post says today the probe focuses on the CIA's role in setting up a Swiss bank account for Iranian arms payments. A spokesman for Attorney General Edwin Meese would not confirm or deny that the CIA is under study, but promised a thorough investigation. CIA Director William Casey has acknowledged the agency's involvement in setting up that Swiss bank account, but reportedly has maintained he was only aware of gossip about the Contra connection until this week's public revelations. President Reagan's chief of staff is denying news reports that he was briefed about the Contra cash transfers well before this week. UPI is quoting an anonymous source who implicates Donald Regan. But Regan says that's ridiculous. CNN's Frank Sesno reports.
UPI quotes an unidentified White House official who says Chief of Staff Donald Regan did know about the diversion of up to $30 million to the Nicaraguan Contras. Regan denies it.
No, that's ridiculous. I was not briefed thoroughly on all of this. I mean, I don't know where the story came from. How can you comment on an unnamed source? Do you all enjoy your Thanksgiving?
How about you?
Sounds to me like I'm the turkey.
The situation has been further complicated by reports that Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, fired from the National Security Council, destroyed vital documents before his departure. Officials will neither confirm or deny the story. The elusive North was seen at his home and wasn't talking either.
I can't make a statement now. When the time is appropriate, I will give all the facts in the appropriate forum, and I will do so under the advice of my counsel.
Nonetheless, North went to the White House Thanksgiving morning, tried to get in, but according to a spokesman for the Secret Service, was turned away because he didn't have a valid pass. One official says North has now been placed on the do not admit list. Presidential aides say if North destroyed anything official, it's not lost.
I do know that national security documents are not in the possession of just one person. There are copies of them, and there is a central file, and that's not under, that's under close supervision, so there'll be no chance that those will be missing.
One source who knows North describes him as very secretive, not the kind of man to keep extensive or incriminating personal notes in his office. But, says the source, we probably will never know precisely what Ollie did. As the president spends Thanksgiving weekend at his ranch with his family, his top aides continue to distance themselves from the controversy while pledging cooperation with the Justice Department's widening criminal probe.
I'm back out here, but the Attorney General has brought in senior Department of Justice officials, the FBI, and this is a normal procedure. We want to have out in the open anything of a wrongdoing.
But there is a lot that is not out in the open, with new questions about documents possibly destroyed, and who knew what and when. A spokesman for the Justice Department says there's no reason to believe there were more people involved than Attorney General Meese originally reported. But officials note the Iranian arms scandal is now in the hands of the investigators, and no one is predicting where that investigation will go. Frank Sesno, CNN, with the president in Santa Barbara.
This just in to CNN from Damascus, Syria. Syria has announced the withdrawal of its ambassador in Bonn, West Germany, and Syria has also ordered 3 West German diplomats based in Damascus to leave Syria. This action by Syria follows West Germany's decision yesterday to impose limited economic sanctions on Syria after the conviction of 2 Palestinians apparently involved in terrorism using Syrian help. We'll have more on this later in Daywatch. Molly?
Thank you, Brian. It's going on 6 minutes past the hour now. The United States will officially break the SALT II arms treaty today when it deploys its 131st B-52 bomber with nuclear missiles. The decision drew harsh words from Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in India today. At a news conference in New Delhi, Gorbachev on Daywatch.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Daywatch on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With Donna, Kelley, and Bob Cain in Atlanta, John Holliman in Washington, and Dave Monsees in New York.
Good morning. Pope John Paul II provided a rare, relaxed glimpse of what he's like yesterday during a visit to a Catholic school. The Pope spent nearly a half hour with a class of 10-year-olds in Melbourne, Australia. After a serenade by the class, the Pope answered whatever questions the youngsters could come up with. The first child asked where the Pope was shot during an assassination attempt in 1981. He answered the question by pointing to his right side. The rest of the questions ranged from his wartime memories to his taste in music.
How did you feel when Germany and Russia moved in Poland?
Oh, that was a tragic moment. That was a great injustice for my people and for ourselves. And we have suffered immensely during that time. That was a very tragic moment.
What's your favorite music?
that Saturday. She, I like very much the music. Maybe I like more the classical music, but also the modern. I am not a man of the past, no? I am very interested in the modern, contemporary music, also in so-called, what is the name, no?
Rock. The Pope also told the children he was a little tired and confused because of his whirlwind tour of several countries, but delighted them when he said his meeting with kangaroos made him feel better. Actually, the Pope has yet to meet an Australian kangaroo this trip, but he did get to cuddle a koala in Brisbane.
Lava is still flowing from a vent in the side of Hawaii's Kilauea volcano. Scientists say it's the 48th phase of an eruption that started in 1983. The latest flow has claimed at least 9 houses, but the lava has now apparently turned away from other residential areas. The 7-mile-long flow is said to be about 150 yards from the sea, moving at a speed of about 5 yards an hour. Island officials have yet to put together an estimate of the most recent damage.
Firefighters in McDonald, Ohio had to deal with dozens of fires simultaneously yesterday. All the fires
will be across Florida later on today. Here's Bob Cain now with more news.
Thanks, Valerie. If you have one of those little Born to Shop bumper stickers on your car, today's your day. Traditionally, the day after Thanksgiving is the year's biggest shopping day, and it'll find stores packed with pre-Christmas buyers. You have to get there early just to find a parking space, and that's what our correspondent John Zarrella has done in Miami. John.
Bob, we are at the mall. That's it, the mall at 163rd Street in North Miami, and as you can see, it's all decorated and ready for the Christmas season. It's not real busy here yet this morning. Most of the stores opened at 8 a.m., that traditional early start for the early shoppers with their buy one, get one free bargains and things like that. But not real crowded here this morning. That may have to do with the fact that Miami's had some awfully good weather the past few days for you folks in the north, and it's been in the mid-80s, beautiful beach weather. A lot of people we talked to said it's really too nice a day to be shopping, even though this is the big day. Retailers around the country say that 10% of all their Christmas sales will probably be done today, and 50 to 70% of all the Christmas all the toys that are bought throughout the year are bought at Christmas time. While this is a great day for bargain hunters and shoppers around the country, it's one that, although retailers anticipate and look forward to for good sales, they're a little skeptical.
For business purposes, they call this Black Friday. We're hoping that people come here and buy like crazy.
You think they will?
Yeah, I'm hoping for it.
How much of your business do you think, your Christmas sales, do you generate in one day like today?
Well, it's not a percentage of the whole season. It's more of an idea of how this season will go. If Black Friday is good, the rest of Christmas will be dynamite.
To tell you the truth, I don't know what to expect. You hear so much that there's going to be so many people on the news this morning. They said instead of traffic report, they had the mall report. It's just you've been through some, day after Thanksgivings that are good, some after bad, that sometimes they overproject what they expect you to do.
I've been here 4 years, and nobody can scare me. No crowd in the world can scare me. I'm ready. I want all the money.
As soon as I get off here, I'm going to start my Christmas shopping. I've got a lot to do this year. This is John Zarrella reporting live from the mall at 163rd Street in North Miami.
Daywatch is brought to you by Whirlpool and your Whirlpool dealer. We want to make your world a little easier.
Check the weather here at home and in Europe just ahead on Daywatch.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Daywatch on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With Molly McCoy and Brian Nelson in Atlanta, John Holliman in Washington, and Dave Monsees in New York.
And good morning, everyone. At least 35 people were injured in a Northern Ireland border town today when mortar shells crashed into a crowded street. The civilians were not the targets of that attack, but they were the victims. And police blamed the Irish Republican Army. CNN's Mike Shinoy reports.
The target was a police station in Newry, south of Belfast. But the IRA guerrillas missed, and their 3 homemade mortars fell on a nearby house, a school, and a printing works. 39 people were injured, including children and 2 pregnant women. 4 of the victims are reported to be in serious condition. Police said it was a miracle no one was killed.
These mortar attacks are totally indiscriminate and inaccurate. They are a vicious weapon, and they have warned that members of the public would be injured.
Following the incident, British soldiers mounted an intensive search, but the IRA men had disappeared. This attack was apparently designed to be a repeat of one staged last February, aimed at the same police station, but that time with deadly accuracy, killing 9 police officers. One reason for the continuing attacks here is that Newry, a predominantly Catholic town, is just a few miles from Northern Ireland's border with the Irish Republic. The IRA has long used the rugged border area as a sanctuary and staging ground. That was supposed to change after last year's Anglo-Irish agreement raised the prospect of closer cooperation along the border between British and Irish security forces. But this latest incident shows the IRA is still able to operate in the area and that it's still a force to be reckoned with. Mike Shinoy, CNN, London.
There was a major controversy underway in Britain about how much control the government should have over intelligence-gathering agencies. It stems from the case of a retired spy who wrote a book about his experiences. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's government is trying to stop publication of the book. CNN's John Donovan has more from London.
Prime Minister Thatcher has not been credited with managing her own cloak and dagger crisis very well. Her problem is a British spy turned horse farmer living in Australia, a man named Peter Wright. He worked more than 20 years inside Britain's security services, where he compiled a list of what may be embarrassing state secrets that he now wants to publish in a book. Among the allegations he's said to be making, that British security bugged Harold Wilson, Britain's own left-leaning prime minister in the 60s and 70s, that they also bugged foreign embassies in London, although it's not known if the American embassy is on his list, and most damaging that this man, the late Sir Roger Hollis, chief of a central intelligence branch here, was actually a Soviet spy. Wright has said he wants these stories published in order to protect British intelligence from further Soviet penetration. But in Parliament, Thatcher has said
that like all present and former members of the Security Service, Mr. Wright owes a lifelong duty of confidentiality to the Crown. Unauthorized publication of his manuscript would violate this obligation.
But in Australia, where Wright wants to publish, Thatcher has no censorship powers, so she's suing in an Australian court. The case in the British press getting equal space with President Reagan's Iran problems, although with more focus on the comical. For instance, her man in Australia, Sir Robert Armstrong, on his first day out got into an argument with photographers and ended up knocking a camera to the ground. On the stand, Sir Robert has, by most press accounts, looked ridiculous, so confusing the judge that he finally started clowning around about how confusing the intelligence world seems to be. But there is a darker aspect to the case, suggestions of deep ideological splits inside Britain's security services, with agents who disagree with government policy pursuing policies of their own. All of this is said to be in Peter Wright's book, a part of the secret world that Margaret Thatcher wants to keep secret. John Donovan, CNN, London.
A former nuclear technician has been charged with giving classified information to a British newspaper. Mordecai Vanunu is accused of telling the Sunday Times of London that Israel has a nuclear factory under the Negev desert. In addition to espionage, Vanunu is charged with aiding an enemy in wartime. If convicted, he could be sentenced to death. But Israeli radio reports that a life prison sentence is more likely.
Students clashed with riot police in Seoul, South.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Friday, November 28th. With Donna, Kelley, and Bob Cain in Atlanta, John Holliman in Washington, and Dave Monsees in New York.
Good morning. A 7-mile-long lava flow stretches now from Hawaii's Kilauea volcano nearly to the sea. The lava is advancing at a rate of about 5 yards an hour. And for the first time in more than 2 years, the advancing lava is destroying property. At least 9 homes have been lost in just the last few days. Jim McCoy files this report from Kalapana, Hawaii.
One by one, the lava crept into the yards of Kalapana homes and ignited them. And as the night wore on, the flows continued their march to the ocean, a march that began last month. On the ground, Kalapana Highway resembled a war zone. This home next to the highway went quickly. All that remained was the corrugated roofing. Officials from the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park kept a vigil in the eerie atmosphere. To these people, it was a bittersweet experience.
You know, you hate to see people's houses go. They go so fast, and people lived in them for so long. It's a real tragedy, Jim. It really is. But it's an awesome experience.
At dawn, the shells of homes lay smoking, but Madame Pele wasn't done yet. More homes in the path of the flow burned to the ground. This marked the first time in 2.5 years that property has been destroyed by Kilauea. But in spite of overwhelming odds, people did not give up. There were valiant stories of people battling nature. Firemen sprayed water on the lava as it entered Louis Powell's yard. The water caused the flow to crust and temporarily slow. Sometimes it would slightly divert from its path. It was touch and go all through the night. Some of Powell's neighbors thought this battle was lost. But at dawn today, the Powell house stood, surrounded by still steaming lava, the house undamaged. Amidst the terrible losses along this stretch of coastline, this seemed a sign of hope.
New rules on drug testing for federal employees are expected to be published on Monday. The Washington Post reports the rules will include a provision for firing some.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Newsday for November 28, 1986. I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York. Coming up, all the day's news as well as a look at retail sales across the country as Americans plunge into their annual Christmas shopping frenzy.
We'll also have the latest on Hawaii's Kilauea volcano.
And Soviet General Secretary Gorbachev ends his state visit to India, calling for a nuclear-free world.
In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw. Democratic leaders are attacking the Reagan administration's decision to go beyond the limits of one provision of the unratified SALT II Arms Treaty. Today, a B-52 bomber with cruise missiles is scheduled to go into service violating those limits. Les Aspin, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, says the move is a very bad decision. Sam Nunn, the senior Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, says the administration's action gives the Soviets a propaganda advantage and a military advantage in near-term missile production capabilities. We'll talk about the SALT controversy during the International Hour with former SALT negotiator Paul Warnke and Soviet First Secretary Vitaly Churkin. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev criticized President Reagan's decision to breach the SALT II treaty before he even returned to Moscow today. He says it's a major mistake that will make arms control talks more difficult. He says it also contradicts the spirit of the Iceland summit. Gorbachev made the comments in New Delhi, where he's been all week on an official visit. He and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi issued a joint statement calling for a global nuclear freeze. And Gorbachev said he wanted all Soviet troops out of Afghanistan soon, but didn't give a timetable.
Recent disclosures in
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev says the United States is making a big mistake in abandoning the SALT II Arms Accords. The French government continues to face the most serious student unrest since 1968. We'll tell you why the protests are taking place. Good afternoon. From CNN headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Ralph Wenge.
In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw. Democratic leaders have launched their attack on the Reagan administration's decision to violate the limits of the unratified SALT II Arms Treaty. Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia, who will head the Senate Armed Services Committee in January, says the move gives the Soviets a world propaganda advantage and a military edge in near-term missile production capabilities. Les Aspin, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, says the administration has made a, quote, very bad decision. Today, the 131st B-52 bomber, equipped with cruise missiles, became operational, exceeding the limits of the SALT II agreement. Later this hour, we'll talk about the SALT controversy with former arms negotiator Paul Warnke and Soviet First Secretary Vitaly Churkin.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev said today that breaking the SALT II treaty is a major mistake, and he accused the Reagan administration of violating its pledge to seek nuclear disarmament. Now, that comment, made just before ending a state visit to India, was Gorbachev's first public criticism of the U.S. move. CNN's Gerlin Yonts reports from Moscow.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev told a news conference in New Delhi that the American decision to exceed the limits of the SALT II treaty is a mistake. He asserted that the United States is demonstrating contempt for this important treaty, and by exceeding the treaty's limits, it makes it more difficult to search for approaches for disarmament. The Reagan administration has announced its plans to break the SALT II pact by putting a B-52 bomber carrying cruise missiles back into operation on Friday without removing a missile-carrying submarine from service. The communist leader added that this most recent step is contradictory to the overall entire logic of the Reykjavik talks. But, he added, this move should serve as a stimulus to other countries to renew their commitment to disarmament. He called on all nations to declare their position to the United States government. The SALT II treaty was signed in 1979 by former President Carter and the late Soviet leader Brezhnev. The treaty was never ratified by the U.S. Senate, but both countries have followed the provisions. The United States explanation for exceeding SALT II is due to what they call the Soviet military threat and the Soviet Union's continuous violations of disarmament treaties. Gerlin Yonts, CNN, Moscow.
More details and denials are coming out today about the arms to Iran affair. The Washington Post is reporting the Justice Department has expanded its probe of the matter to include the CIA's possible role in getting Iranian arms money to Contra rebels. And the Los Angeles Times is reporting there have been new allegations by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who is said to be the key man in the operation. The Times says North has told several people that he personally briefed White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan on the plan early on. Today, Regan again denied that report. In yet another development, a London newspaper, The Independent, is carrying a story quoting former Iranian President Abu Hassan Bani Sadr. He says former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane met in Iran with a leader of the militants who held 52 Americans hostage during the Carter administration in 1979. And Bani Sadr claims McFarlane and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North brought 23 tons of arms with them during the September visit. And meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel North is saying little publicly about unfolding developments. He has told reporters that at the appropriate time, he will make a full exposition. With all of the developments and investigations surrounding this growing story, the White House today distributed a memo to staffers. It urges them to cooperate fully with the Justice Department and the Special Commission reviewing the role of the National Security Council.
In the Middle East, America's allies and enemies alike are still in an uproar over the Iran affair. From Turkey to Tehran to the Persian Gulf, the state-run presses are accusing Washington of insulting the Arab world, of lying, and of losing its credibility. CNN's Ben McNibb has more from Cairo.
Middle East cartoonists are having a field day ridiculing Uncle Sam over U.S. arms deals with Iran. That mood is reflected in the street.
President Reagan is contradicting himself by saying that he will vanish terrorism, and he helped it.
It's not helping the way of peace, the steps of peace. It's against all the rules, against the peace way.
USA always says something and do something different.
Instead of encouraging Iranian moderation, as the U.S. intended, the arms deal drew the response from Islamic Revolutionary Patriarch Ayatollah Khomeini that seeking U.S. contacts is like consorting with the devil. Prospects are damaged. The arms link might help free Americans still held by pro-Iranian terrorists in Lebanon.
I think it is naive on the part of whoever negotiated
that a couple of cargo weapons, armament, you can really change the mentality of the Iranian Revolution.
U.S. efforts to isolate the Syrian regime of Hafiz Assad for alleged state support of terrorism have been shoved aside in the uproar over the Iranian arms deal. The leaders of Egypt and Jordan, both close to Washington, are dismayed by the arms shipments to Iran. Avowed U.S. policy to promote stability and advance Mideast peace has, for the moment, been eclipsed by the need to restore U.S. credibility in the region. Ben McNitt, CNN, Cairo.
Philippine President Corazon Aquino replaced 2 more cabinet ministers today, less than a week after breaking up an apparent coup attempt. She also saw to it that one of the key figures in the alleged plot, her former defense minister, was allowed to leave government with honor. CNN's Brian Jenkins reports from Manila.
It was one big party, with Juan Ponce Enrile, the guest of honor, escorted by his successor, Rafael Ileto, and welcomed by none other than the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Fidel Ramos, who teamed up with Enrile earlier this year to topple Ferdinand Marcos, but this week teamed up with Corazon Aquino to force out Enrile. As a sort of consolation prize, there was a Legion of Honor medal for the outgoing minister from his president. After thanking President Aquino and General Ramos and even the media, Enrile said his goodbyes.
I have served the government for almost 2 decades. I leave it without any rancor, without any regrets, or without any recriminations.
The conservative Nacionalista Party claims Enrile will now serve as its leader, but he refused to confirm it. Instead, the Harvard Law School graduate who administered martial law under Marcos proceeded to turn over his post to Ileto, the West Point graduate who stood alone among the Philippines' top brass in opposing martial law. Despite that contrast, the new minister promised few changes in the military establishment.
My job is not to change the crop that has already been planted. It is to see to it that as much as possible, the harvest shall be bountiful for the benefit of our people.
A short time later, President Aquino went on national TV to announce more changes in her cabinet. She had replaced her ministers of natural resources and public works, and more changes, she said, will be made next week. The trick for Mrs. Aquino in revamping her cabinet is to give the right wing and the left wing as little reason as possible to complain. With the political extremes in check, she can then count on the middle class to carry the upcoming vote on a new constitution and its extension of her term in office. Brian Jenkins, CNN, Manila.
Pope John Paul II showed both a serious and a lighter side today in Melbourne, Australia, during a visit to a maternity.
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
A few minutes ago, we told you about the decision by the Reagan administration to activate the B-52 cruise missile bomber and thereby breaking the unratified SALT II treaty. It's a decision that has drawn quite a bit of fire, both at home and abroad. And joining us now on the International Hour to talk more about this is Paul Warnke, who was chief negotiator of the 1979 SALT II agreement. He directed the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency under President Carter, and right now he's a partner in the law firm Clifford & Warnke. Mr. Warnke, thank you very much for joining us today. President Reagan said about 6 months ago that any decisions on strategic weapons would be based on, and I use his words now, the nature and magnitude of the threat posed by Soviet strategic forces. Now, is the president trying to tell us something new here about the Soviets?
In my opinion, no. I think basically what this shows is that those in the Reagan administration that have always been opposed to nuclear arms control have won. They prevailed. What it shows is their ingrained hostility to arms control. That's all it shows.
Are you saying that there's a possibility here that what Les Aspin said today is possibly true, to appease conservatives who are pretty angry today over what happened in the Iran arms deal?
No, the decision apparently was made about 6 months ago. And I think, as I say, what it reflects is that there are those in the administration that would prefer to have no arms control whatsoever. So while they talk about ridding the world of nuclear weapons, they are in the process of dismantling all of the restraints that we have, both the SALT II limits on offensive nuclear weapons and the ABM treaty that limits strategic defense. I think what it shows also is that our national policy, national security policy making apparatus is in disarray. I think it's all the same thing as giving arms to the Ayatollah, purportedly to stop the Iran-Iraq war. I think basically the national security apparatus is performing in very poor fashion indeed.
Senator Sam Nunn says he thinks this decision is going to do nothing but help the Soviets. Do you agree with that?
Oh, that's true. See, as the Joint Chiefs have pointed out ever since SALT was completed, the limitations in the SALT II Treaty limit the Soviet forces much more than they do those of the United States. We have to struggle in order to violate the SALT II limits. We've had to postpone the scheduled retirement of a Poseidon ballistic missile submarine in order to go over the 1320 limit. The Soviet Union can exceed the more important limits simply by ceasing to destroy existing missiles as new and improved ones come into service. So it is clearly against the security of the United States.
And can we not also see an increasing barrage of propaganda from the Soviet Union in the coming months on this?
Oh, I think that they will use this. I think they'll have a public relations field day. What they'll try and point out to our allies is that we say one thing, we say we're trying to limit the Soviet nuclear threat, and at the same time are taking steps that ensure that we and our friends will face an increased threat rather than a decreased one.
All right, putting all of this together and looking at the total picture, what is this going to mean to the current talks going on in Geneva?
I think that the talks are headed no place anyway. See, until we're willing to accept restrictions on strategic defense, the Soviet Union cannot afford to reduce its offensive systems.
You're talking about Star Wars now.
Talking about Star Wars, yes. See, as Secretary Weinberger said just in advance of the Geneva summit back in November of 1985, if there's any possibility of a Soviet territorial defense, we can't afford to cut our offense. Instead, we'll have to increase it and increase its ability to penetrate. So as a consequence, what we're asking the Soviet Union to do is to sacrifice their retaliatory deterrent. And at the same time, we're scrapping the SALT II limits. Now, I think no negotiator could get any place in Geneva against this background of total contempt for arms control.
Have you been offering any kind of, well, I won't use the word secret, I'll use the word private, maybe information or talking to or advice to the administration on Star Wars?
No, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't consulted anybody that's been involved in the arms control process in previous administrations.
And they should, right?
Well, all I can say is that the Carter administration consulted those who had been active in the Eisenhower, Nixon, and Ford administrations on a regular basis. You shouldn't throw away your institutional memory. This isn't a partisan problem. Republicans will burn in a nuclear war just as well as Democrats. Probably more so because they're fatter.
All right. What about our allies in Europe right now? We're already seeing a lot of criticism over the Iran arms deal and the revelations that have come out over the past few days on that. What about the SALT II?
I think that our allies are going to be very upset about it. See, they count on us not only to maintain the military core of Western defense, but also to manage the East-West relationship. And I think essentially we're defaulting on our responsibility. And I'm afraid our allies will read it that way.
And what about President Reagan facing up to the 100th Congress coming up in about 6 or 7 weeks from now? Mostly Democrats. He's already in trouble. What's this decision going to mean?
Well, I think you can tell what it's going to mean in terms of the reaction of the new chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Sam Nunn, and the reaction of the present chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Les Aspin. They both indicated that they think that this decision is a mistake, that what it does is to give at least a short-term military advantage to the Soviet Union. And I think that their reaction is an accurate reaction, and what it does is to indicate that the president is going to face spirited opposition to his, what I think is callous flouting of the existing restraints.
Paul Warnke, who was chief negotiator of the 1979 SALT II agreement. Thank you, sir, very much for joining us today on the International Hour. Bernie?
French students against an education reform proposal show up in full force before the National Assembly today. We'll have that story when the International Hour continues.
It's a question of taste. If you had your pick of two cereals, both with 100% nutrition, would you pick the one with just one kind of flake?
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
We had this just in. Sources in Washington now say that the Justice Department is now investigating whether anyone profited personally from the Iran arms deal. These sources say investigators will pay special attention to those involved in diverting profits from the deal to the Contras. And they also say the Justice Department intends to trace every dollar in the secret deal. Bernie?
1986, the diplomatic expulsions, the U.S. today exceeding the SALT II arms limit on strategic weapons, the lack of progress in arms negotiations from the Reykjavik summit to now. What state American-Soviet relations? Joining us on the International Hour, Vitaly Churkin, First Secretary of the Soviet Embassy here in Washington. Before we get to U.S.-Soviet relations in regards to arms, you're aware of the controversy in this country about arms going to Iran and the investigations that are underway. Your government has been rather quiet about this. Why?
Well, I've been watching the situation, and I understand that people in the United States too want explanations, and more explanations will follow. So indeed, I don't have an official comment to make on that. Unofficially, of course, I can say that, especially when you look at the Contras side of it, that only substantiates our attitude to that part of the U.S. foreign policy. And it shows again that this is an unlawful war conducted by unlawful means. And this is only another example of that. You remember the mining of the ports of Nicaragua, now this other development. So it only shows that it is indeed an unacceptable policy.
When you say unofficially, how can you speak unofficially when you represent your government?
Well, that means that I have my own views, and I'm not prevented by anything from expressing my views whenever I want.
But it is rather interesting that your government has been silent on a United States domestic affair that's been going on for almost 3 weeks. Any significance there?
Well, I don't think so. It is partly, at least, a U.S. domestic affair, and some of the aspects, as I said, are not yet clear. And there is no obligation on the part of any government to make a statement on anything immediately after it happens.
Well,
we are not a news organization, we are a government.
But your government has been quick to exploit situations in this country sometimes. You do admit to that, don't you?
Well, I'm not an expert on the media. Sometimes media acts this way, yes.
The status of the arms talks. Negotiators next week in Geneva, an interim session, and then they go back in January. What do you see?
We are trying to achieve progress. Incidentally, in Geneva, we wanted these negotiations to begin as soon as possible after the end of the previous round. A couple of weeks ago, we proposed a resumption in December. The U.S. side was not ready for it, so there was a kind of a compromise solution, an interim meeting of several members of delegations from each side. We'll see what emerges out of that. But I see both opportunities and obstacles. The opportunity is that there was the Reykjavik summit, and it did open a wide window of opportunity for arms control. Since that time, there have been, of course, backpedaling, as we see it, on the part of the U.S. from the results of Reykjavik, and efforts to...
No backpedaling from your side?
No backpedaling. I think I can prove that. We have not been... We have not been withdrawing our proposals which we made in Reykjavik, and whatever we were saying about what happened in Reykjavik, we were ready to prove on the basis of the minutes of the talks there.
Yes, but both leaders, your leader and my leader, say they have differing interpretations of what happened in Reykjavik. So you really can't say that there's only backpedaling by the United States.
We are not saying that we have a differing interpretation. What we are saying is that we know what happened in Reykjavik, and we can prove it. What they are saying is that, they didn't mean it, or they have changed their mind, even about proposals which are not acceptable to us. They are saying that they are now changing their mind. But I do not really want to go into that.
I understand that. I asked you what do you foresee out of Geneva? And you accuse the United States of backpedaling.
Oh,
I
yes.
had to interrupt
Oh,
you.
yes. Oh, yes. I foresee, at least what we want to have, is a movement towards resolving the problems which remain after Reykjavik. And one of the achievements of Reykjavik was that it did single out the problem. It is SDI. We have been trying since Reykjavik to engage the U.S. government into discussion of that, and we offered to explore where is the dividing line.
But that's done at Geneva, is it not?
Yes, and we are looking to continuing that work in Geneva early December and then during the negotiations.
Do you think...
It remains to be seen whether or not at this point the U.S. side is going to be prepared for that. So far they have not been prepared for that.
And what about your side?
We are prepared. It is our offer. In Vienna, our two foreign ministers, the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister of our country, met, and we proposed high-level discussions on that subject. They were not ready. They were not ready to discuss SDI in any specifics, and the ABM treaty, as it reflects on SDI in any
So
specifics.
we must wait for what happens next week and, of course, in January.
Yes, we must. And this is where the SALT II treaty, as I see it, as we see it, comes into play because it does not improve things for the future negotiations.
For the United States to have moved the 131st
Yes, to move beyond the limitation, because the arms control process is quite bristle, and you have to be very careful about creating the proper conditions for it. And exceeding the SALT II treaty limitations is certainly another offer to slam that window of opportunity shut. Which is not as wide open now already as it was when the Reykjavik meeting took place.
President Reagan told your side as early as last May that he was going to do this. He certainly told his counterpart, Mr. Gorbachev in Reykjavik, that he was thinking about deploying the 131st B-52 bomber. So it's not a surprise to your side.
It's not completely a surprise, but you should recall also one of the parts of that statement. It did say that when we decide, and I'm not quoting, but this is the meaning of it, when we decide whether or not actually to exceed, we'll also look at the situation of the negotiations. And since that time, enormous things happened in the negotiations. There was Reykjavik and the new window of opportunity. So it adds an additional bitter taste to that decision as it comes at this point.
But he cites reasons for those decisions. Your side's previous track record in violating previous arms treaties, etc., and also the threat posed by your military to this government.
You know, we have been through that before. Everybody has been by this point through this before. We have, of course, given our explanations of those issues.
In fairness to the President of the United States, I'm just citing to you what he has said as a rationale for his actions.
Yes, absolutely. What I want to say to that, besides denying quite categorically that there were violations on our part, is that you have to look at it at what it actually means. The United States has over 1,500 cruise missiles on bombers at this time, on top of thousands of other warheads. And to add simply 20 more warheads and discard a very important restraint in arms control does show a certain contempt towards the entire process of arms control, which does not help negotiations. So you have to balance the military value of it, which is not very great, against the political damage of it, which is great. And when you do...
So you do concede that by deploying this 131st B-52 bomber with a cruise missile does not really pose that great a military threat to your country. You just said that.
That one bomber, it would be hard to argue that it changes things so radically that our security is in shambles. Of course, of course it's not. It is a very important political statement. It does break the treaty limitations, and it shows that in the future also the United States is not going to abide by the provisions of that treaty.
And you categorically deny that your side has broken previous arms agreements?
Categorically.
Next subject. Do you think in your heart of hearts that Mikhail Gorbachev and President Reagan will sit down at a summit?
I don't know. It's very difficult to predict that. We have that problem.
No, what do you think? What do you feel? You're an arms expert. That's your specialty.
And I feel that at this point I cannot make any prediction. This is my feeling. Everything will depend on whether or not the U.S. is going to be prepared to talk about SDI seriously.
When you say prepared, what do you mean prepared? Are you saying that the Americans go to Geneva unprepared? That's not what you're trying to say.
No, I'm saying that it's a very simple thing is happening. We're telling them, why don't we sit down at a high level and talk about what is permitted by the ABM Treaty and what is not permitted by the ABM Treaty, how SDI intrudes into the ABM Treaty. And they are saying, we are not ready for that. We don't want to do that.
No, they're not saying that. That's why they're meeting next week in Geneva. This is an interim meeting in Geneva. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, and then they meet in January. So why are you saying the United States says it's not prepared? That's not true.
The Geneva, no, it is true, and I'm quite serious about that.
No, I'm sure.
I wish I want you to understand it so that there were no impression that I'm telling something which is not accurate. There are more things in the Geneva negotiations than just SDI, and of course they are talking about strategic weapons, medium-range nuclear systems, and there was a large measure of agreement on those issues in Reykjavik.
I understand. I'm not calling.
But there is this stumbling block, and by this time, the United States, the U.S. side, has not yet been prepared to address that stumbling block seriously in the course of the negotiation.
You say lack of preparation, and the State Department says there was a difference in scheduling.
It's not lack of preparation. It's a political thing. Of course, it's not that some people have been lazy within the State Department, have not done their homework. It's more important, I'm afraid, than that.
Mm-hmm.
And no political willingness at this point to address SDI seriously.
We shall see in Geneva.
We shall.
Vitaly Churkin, First Secretary of the Soviet Embassy here in Washington. As always, a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ralph?
Thank you, Bernie. The CNN International Hour continues in just a minute.
Sports Illustrated